Hello, friends, and welcome to the final edition of the Blue Lounge for the QIUP World Universities Peace Invitational Debate 2017. We just witnessed probably a very engaging grand finals in this particular tournament. We had LSEA in opening government, we had Sydney A in opening opposition, we had NUSA in closing government, and we had Oxford A in closing opposition. The motion before the House was that this House believes that the United States should end all support to Saudi Arabia. And after the grand finals, we had a closing ceremony whereby opening opposition, Sydney A were crowned the champion of this tournament. So, like right off the bat, if we're looking at the motion, the first thing I thought of immediately was that it's gonna be something that's complex in the sense that it's going to lead to a lot of different stakeholders, like intertwined with the United States, as well as the Middle Eastern region, as well as Saudi Arabia themselves. In the debate, we had people talking about the MBS, Russia, the global economy, Qatar, and Turkey at some pieces throughout the debate.
And to join us in our commentary, we have Yan Shi from Nanyang Technology University. He was also a participant in this tournament, but he was there to watch the grand finals with us, and he will be joining us.
Yeah, I was wondering how I was going to get introduced. So I didn't make it to the grand final, lost at semi. That obviously makes me eminently qualified to comment about what happened in that final. Yeah, what do you think?
So I do agree with the call that opening oppositions did win, and I think they were very intricate in the way in which they explain all from stakeholders. But let's go straight to opening government first. So essentially opening government, which is by LSEA, talk about how at this point in time, the MBS and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia essentially is extremely dependent on US capital market. They are also extremely dependent on the military aid that's provided by United States to fight their proxy wars around Middle East. So in this instance, if US do threaten them and do leave and no longer have diplomatic ties with Saudi Arabia, essentially MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, will liberalize their market and stop all wars in Yemen, essentially, or stop isolating Qatar per se. So what do you think about this specific argument?
Just one big question. As soon as I started their speeches, I was like, but is this the intuitive case you've run? Because I think the central premise of the OG case, and I have some other thoughts on that, but the central premise of the OG case is this, that we're going to use the ending of support as a bargaining chip or as a leverage to get some kind of reform in Saudi Arabia. And that to me already kind of narrows the debate into one question, right? Like if opening opposition can prove that the Saudis aren't going to respond as you want them to respond, you automatically, almost certainly cannot win this debate because you just focus it on one thing which I think is quite hard to prove.
Which is,
and secondly, it seems like a weird reading of the motion. I know it's a fair one, but it seems like a more natural reading of the motion seems to be just like comments about why Saudi interests no longer align with US interests, or like what happens when the US withdraws support, rather than a case that basically says, well, we don't actually think there's anything deeply wrong with the Saudis, but if we just say like, we're not going to give you what you have from us anymore, then they're going to come crawling back to us and then they'll do whatever we want for them to do. So I think that's what set up the debate in a strange factor right from the beginning.
So you don't think that the argument about how Saudi Arabia is extremely dependent on US is enough to say that US
I think it makes the entire case hang on that point. If you don't win that point, you lose.
Right.
And I think the other thing is they kind of recognize this, and they don't want to make their case seem too narrow, which is why then the rest of the Prime Minister's speech ends up being kind of like, and here are 1 million and one benefits that can happen in various directions. So it almost seems, I think, both like they end up limiting themselves and they run an incredibly diffuse case in terms of not being able to focus on like one key thing that they want to prove. So it's almost a speak of the worst of both worlds. Which is not to say that I think the speeches given were in the abstract bad, but I think it's a hard case to win with.
Especially when it's all coming down to whether there is a huge dependency between Saudi Arabia and US. I mean, to a very large extent, I don't think anyone's going to deny that. I mean, there is some dependency, I suppose, but it seems like the only thing you would also have to prove is also whether it's like almost as if it's the sole dependency between Saudi Arabia and the USA. And like the second opening opposition, which they did, prove that there are either alternatives or that there are some other ways Saudi Arabia can survive, then opening governments would be lost.
And the comments that even closing opposition open up with is just like, you can't use this to say that we're going to solve the proxy war in Yemen, that Saudi Arabia is going to stop isolating Qatar, they're going to stop human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. It's very hard to prove that. So I think we can all agree that was a problem we had with opening government. What about opening opposition, the champion of the grand finals?
The only thing that immediately stood out to me in opening opposition's case is that they just did the one thing that was needed in order to take out opening government, which is just proving that Saudi Arabia sells stuff to other people, buys stuff from other people as well. And I think that was enough for me to think, okay, so that means there's no huge dependency between Saudi Arabia and the USA, which means essentially a lot of the benefits, a lot of the impacts that opening government wanted to fight for was gone. I was wondering whether maybe perhaps there was anything more or something more positive other than that in opening opposition.
Well, I think the first thing they do very well is they meet every question that opening government throws at them and answers it, and then gives it a little extra. So, for example, opening government says, you're incredibly competitive in the United States, and if we say you're not having our money and our arms anymore, you'll have to follow what we say. And they rightly point out that there are lots of other people that Saudi Arabia can turn to. They, I think, analyze quite well why Russia is a viable other actor. They say things like, even if Russia has other alliances in the region, they can play one off against the other. So here's this like other, power maybe that can continue to finance Saudi Arabia, which will mean that the Saudis can continue doing what they want to do. But then I think they extend it, right? They always, I think this is just an example of what they're doing, but in each response to the question, they're able to give something extra and say something like, well, and then if they turn to Russia, it's worse than status quo, not just like a reason not to do this, because then the Russians will have control of oil pipelines in Europe. And so they're able to kind of point to some extra harms of doing this action and make it worse than status quo. And I think that's true of every single answer that they're able to kind of give to the opening government questions.
Right. So, and I think that what also opening opposition was like successfully do is that essentially it's also good for US to have Saudi Arabia as an ally. The fact that the region is unstable, and obviously US has a stake in these specific regions, like the fight in Syria or the proxy wars that have been and the military aid that have been contributing within that region. So it's very important to have Saudi Arabia also as an ally in alongside other allies in the Middle East. So I think not just talking about why it's good for Saudi Arabia to have the US, but why it's also strategic for US to retain this allyship with Saudi Arabia. Okay, so moving on to the closing houses, right? So what I think closing government shifted the debate a little bit by talking about how it is strategic for US because essentially US is becoming more isolationist, withdrawing troops in specific areas, and talking about how the main thing that the Trump administration wants is to protect its domestic interests. And they bring in a lot of arguments about the Jewish lobby and how essentially if they align themselves with Saudi Arabia, essentially that hurts their relationship with Israel. So I'm not very sure why is it that specifically when you no longer have ties with Saudi Arabia, essentially that emphasizes your ability to push the Jewish lobby, for example. So I think like I needed that link. So
I think closing government, they say things that have the potential to win the debate. So for example, I think the shale gas thing, which I think they understand best out of the four teams, is like a reason why geopolitically and economically speaking, the US might not be as dependent or even care as much about the Middle East than it did in the past. And I think
there's alternatives
the way they need to angle that case, it's why it's good for the world, for the US to leave. Not just why it's good for the United States to leave the Middle East. And I think at times in the debate, it almost seems as if they misread emotion. And say like this is an actor debate. We care primarily about US interests. Because the big question that I think both CEO points out, and then it's pointed out in the QI, is that this is not an active debate.
Yeah.
We care about
different interests
that are not just in the United States. And then I think it's really hard if you kind of go all in on the interest of the USA. Why would you care about the interest of the USA versus the interest of like everyone who lives in the Middle East or everyone else in the world who is affected by events in the Middle East? And so if you can't answer that question and you kind of like go all in on one actor in this debate, it's just going to be quite hard for you to gain ground in that debate. And I think this is what happens to them.
And what's dangerous is that like the other three teams are talking about Yemen and Qatar and Turkey and the Kurdish people and Russia. So though I personally think it was interesting to also scale down to what US, like how US is now domestically, and why essentially US have an interest to, you know, not be involved in the conflicts in Saudi Arabia. But at the same time, like what Jan said, it is very dangerous to only talk about one stakeholder when everyone else is talking about, you know.
Especially given the parties that are involved who are huge players within the regions that we're talking about. To like, even if you want to like reinterpret the motion and says that it's an active debate to the United States,
it's still very hard.
It's hard because you know that a lot of other people are going to be affected, and you know judges aren't just going to buy that immediately. Which is also like one of the reasons why I think CG just sort of pigeonholed themselves in the case that they had. But moving on, so I think closing opposition were, I don't know, so one thing I had about closing opposition was that I think, so they seem to, I wouldn't say make the entire case about, but seem to put a lot of their efforts in just talking about just oil prices. Like how exactly would, given the amount of reliance or given the change in dynamics between Saudi Arabia, who exports a lot of oil, and the United States, immediately means that all prices would be raised. Like, I think that's a fair claim. But as to,
I do think that is there in their case.
Exactly.
And I think they find themselves in a tight spot. Because I mean, we haven't really talked very much about OO, given that they won the debate. I think what CEO feels is OO said stuff about why the likely geopolitical alternative that the Saudis can do makes things worse. OO said things about how Mohammed bin Salman is likely going to feel like he can't appear weak by backing down to this US dollar, and therefore and turns to worse forces, like, you know, throwing his lot back in with Wahhabists and how that makes Saudi Arabia less
more extreme,
more extreme, more unstable. Or said things about how essential rivalries between Iran and the Saudis, the age-old like Persian-Arab rivalry, is gonna mean that Iran isn't gonna abandon any and all of its bad behavior, even if the US suspends support. And I think at this point, they probably feel that there's not a lot more that they can do to explore these geopolitical issues. I think the challenge is all says them very quickly. Maybe, you know, not all the analysis that is needed, but often you only need to make 80 or 90% of a claim to kind of make sure that closing can't get over you by making the last 10 or 20% of that claim. So they find themselves in this position where they have to double down, where they feel they have to double down on something different.
Which is focusing on oil prices and the economy, and how essentially if US pull out or still stay, then what is their position, for example, in OPEC, right? Like obviously their ties with Saudi Arabia essentially grants them some form of power to dictate like Saudi Arabia's oil prices.
And I think that's why you get a sort of detailed analysis in member, which you usually don't, about how an increase in oil prices actually harms a lot of people. And that's something that WIP backs up. And again, usually this is kind of a claim that we throw around in debates. It's kind of taken as almost like self-evident. Increase in oil prices, obvious that someone suffers harm along the way. What they need to do is they need to kind of like make that harm more important than any other harm in this debate. I think that's an interesting thing to talk about with CO, because the interesting thing that makes it, I think, contentious between OO and CO, both from what we've heard from the judging panel, but also I think from what anyone has seen the debate would think, is that OWIP comes up and says, well, the opening half clash, all these claims about what people believe, where their interests lie, where their incentives are, it's all uncertain. And you can't really judge uncertain outcomes, and therefore we should greatly prioritize certain outcomes, such as the significant investor confidence / price shock you get over uncertain outcomes. So what do you guys think about this claim? this way of analyzing the debate.
So like, I think you're right in talking about how, because OO have already focused a lot on the bigger harms that happen. So I think it does leave CO in a very tight spot. However, I think at this point in the debate, no one is actually really talking about the repercussions on the economy. No one's actually really like, so CG talk about like, oh, you know, the shale oil and essentially like US no longer needs to depend on Saudi Arabia, but not actually talking about the greater impact of US exploring the shale oil industry and how it affects the oil prices afterwards. Because we can already see the effects now with US drilling and US like having research and development of shale oil. Like we already see the effects of it in oil prices and the way in which they talk to Saudi Arabia. So at this juncture, though it's not in a very good position for CO to be in, but it's also very important for a team to highlight the economical repercussions of this friendship or relationship that US and Saudi Arabia has, because everyone is generally talking about the geopolitical repercussions and the regional stability and instability that happens. But obviously, one of the biggest repercussions that we may face is economy, and essentially that's not it's not going to only affect small areas.
That's why I think that this I'm kind of torn about what to think about this meta weighing. And it's because on the one hand, I think it's, to an extent, this dismissal of uncertainty as something we should care less or much less about is deeply disingenuous, because I mean, all risk assessment, especially when it comes to geopolitical consequences, are assessments of things which may not happen. And the thing about geopolitics is that presumably what you think is that the consequence is important enough such that even if the likelihood is small, it's something that you have to care about. So that's why I guess I'm maybe not a fan of it. But I think why I'm kind of sympathetic to this kind of argument is that it's also the real reason in the real world.
Yes,
no one does anything drastic in IR.
Because
there's always an immediate and obvious harm. Regardless of your calculations about what may happen 10, 20 years in the future, there's always an immediate and obvious reaction to any sort of drastic action.
Which is the economy.
Yeah, which is the economy. I mean, that is also a reason against doing anything, which is something else altogether. But I really think it's kind of an interesting, almost debate-breaking kind of way of weighing or judging the debate that he invites judges to do. I'm not sure I'm persuaded, and I think that
so like in the beginning of the first 2 minutes of his speech, when he did all the meta thing and like, in my first thought it's like, okay, this makes judging easy, but at the same time it's like, so what's the impact of this right now?
So, but I thought, so my general view is that I think it was fair, primarily because so I agree completely with Upwip that I think it's completely speculative, and I was concur with Jan on this.
Yeah, of course.
But what I really liked was the way that led to a branding of the extension that came from CO. So CO talked about oil prices, but if it just came out of nowhere, then obviously it feels as if it's out of place to all of the other discussion that happened in opening. So if you just include it and say that, oh, it's speculative, either there's no point to talk about this, or it doesn't seem to be resolving any deadlocks whatsoever, then I think that's a really smart way to distinguish yourself from the opening houses. So I don't know, maybe like I'm just a guy who just mainly focus on meta debating nowadays.
All right, so that's all for this session of Blue Lounge. We're very happy to have Yanshu on board, and I think we had a lot of fun doing this.
We had a lot of fun doing Blue Lounge throughout the entire tournament. Surely this will not be the last time that we'll do this. We'll be doing this a lot more in the future. Stick around. We'll definitely be seeing you'll definitely be seeing all of us. You'll definitely be seeing a lot of other speakers talking about a lot of interesting debates that you'll definitely be seeing in the future. With that being said, thank you so much for joining us, and see you guys around.
And have a good night.